Hi, my name is Cami, and today I'm going to be talking about the insane toxicity that's been happening on Twitter last week regarding the QSMP community fandom. And it all started when Brazilians made a thread exposing Cellbit, the content creator that it is on the QSMP, the Brazilian content creator. And within the situation, a lot of cases of xenophobia and racism against the Brazilian community been happening, and we cannot let this happen ever again. I am Brazilian, this channel is entirely in Portuguese, but I decided to record this video in English, at least try to record this video in English, because this situation is very serious, and I want to discuss this matter not only with the Brazilian part of the fandom, but try to talk with the entirety of the fandom, because I'm going to bring points that is very important if we want to keep this community like a safe space for everyone. So I'm going to try my best. This situation is very serious, so if you care about the QSMP, please watch this video. I put English and Portuguese subtitles here in this video here on YouTube. The Portuguese subtitles that being appearing right now is going to disappear. So if you want to keep watching with Portuguese subtitles, please activate the captions here on YouTube, because I don't like the looks of the subtitles on the screen. Please put it on YouTube. But I also put the captions in English, so if you speak any other language, YouTube can translate it to you, so you can choose what language do you want. Don't use the automatic captions, use my subtitles in English and put to translate. It probably will work fine, I guess. Okay. It all started when Brazilians made a thread exposing Cellbit. This thread was about the toxic relationship that Cellbit had with his ex-girlfriend, and it all exploded when his ex-girlfriend made the allegation that she never made before about SA. And for the first time ever, Cellbit talked about this and made a docs explaining his side of the story about this ex-relationship. Everything about this docs talk about very sensitive, very triggering topics, but I'm going to put the link for the docs here in the description in Portuguese and in English if you want to check it out. But it's very sensitive, it's very personal to Cellbit, and all of this situation is so bad and frustrating. But I'm not going to talk about Cellbit on this video. I'm going to talk about what happened within the fandom on Twitter while all of this was happening. The toxicity within the QSMP fandom been happening for a long time, but especially last week, cases of xenophobia and racism against the Brazilian community grew at an alarming rate. Of course, I'm going to have a bit biased point of view with the Brazilian community, but I want you guys to know, if you don't know me, I've been talking about the Brazilian QSMP fandom for a long time, and I've been criticizing the Brazilian QSMP fandom for a long time. So I'm not gonna be like, ignore the problems with the Brazilian fandom. Actually, I'm gonna talk about them in this video as well, but we need to talk about the problems that we're having with the others community, but also analyze where this problem started, because it's not like, oh, the QSMP invented racism. No, this is a problem that goes way beyond the QSMP, so we need to talk about it so it won't happen. Okay, I have this silly little doc so it could help me talk about this, but let's start with the Spanish community and especially talk about the insane underrepresentation of the Spanish community on the QSMP server. Okay, if we look at the members, there's a lot of Spanish-speaking members on the QSMP, but the amount of members that actually logs on, it's so low that is insane. Okay, El Mariana sometimes logs on, but barely never. Quackity logs on when he can. Luzu, barely. Maximus, his character died recently, but he said he was going to log on again this year, 2024, but we don't know. Misa barely logs on. Roya been carrying the Spanish content on the QSMP, but even him doesn't log on that much. Sprint, dead. Vegeta, don't remember the last time he logged on. Rubius, oh my god. Rivers, I wish to log on more, but barely never. Willy, almost never. Carre, been logging on the last couple of days, but barely. Polispo used to log on a lot, but now barely never. And German, I actually don't even know, I'm so sorry. And also there's Zaramas that she speaks Spanish, but she mostly make content in English, so I don't know if I even count her or not. What I'm trying to say is that it does still exist Spanish content on the QSMP, but thinking about the original idea and plans for the QSMP versus now is insane. How we barely have content in Spanish. And like even Royer, when he logs on, he speaks, I think, way more English than Spanish. So it totally makes sense the Spanish community get a bit angry about this lack of representation and content with Spanish content on the QSMP. But what is very interesting is that the moment that the Brazilians joined the QSMP is also almost the mark when the Spanish creators stop making content. I'm not saying that there's a direct correlation, but it makes sense for the fandom thinking that it is a correlation, or just subconsciously thinking like, oh, when the Brazilians join, I lost all my creators, like what is happening? And not only with all this lack of content, the Brazilian community is really loud. What I mean about that? What I'm about to say is not exactly true, but I see a lot of people saying this, that the moment that the Brazilians joined the QSMP kind of became the Brazilians and friends. The Brazilians that talk about the content creators and the community, the moment that they joined the QSMP, they basically were lying. This is mine now. Obviously, this was not something forced. I'm not saying this was orchestrated by the QSMP studios, but I can see how people feel like that. And in a little bit, I'm going to talk about the lore of the QSMP, so bear with me, I'm going to explain more this argument when I get there. But when it comes to the Spanish-speaking community, especially the Latin America Spanish-speaking community, shit is kind of insane because Brazil is fucking huge. Like, I got these silly graphs from YouTube videos talk about the size of population of countries within all America and Latin America, comparing like Brazil population with even the largest countries here in Latin America and South America. Brazil has so many people within one country that shit is scary. Like, ignoring the USA because USA is even crazier than Brazil. The closest country that gets to Brazil is Mexico, and Mexico is already a humongous population, but Brazil is almost, or is it 2 times bigger? I don't know math. And when we look at South America only, shit gets way more insane. Like, what is this? So like, even though the Spanish speaking population is way bigger than Brazilian population, but Brazilians, because we are all together in the same country, we can be really, really loud on the internet. And this loudness, not only on the QSMP fandom, is like everywhere. That's why like artists, international artists love Brazil, because we are always screaming at them. You probably already know how it works. Brazilians on the internet is crazy because we are all together in the same place. And because of the language barrier and tons of other reasons, Brazilians isolate themselves from the rest of like Latin America. I know that people could argue that this isolation that Brazil has comes from the other countries isolated Brazil, but I can almost certainly say that this isolation comes from Brazil, because Brazil wants to connect with gringo culture so freaking bad. Brazil wants so badly to be close with Europe and the USA that they just ignore every country on South America or Latin America. And from a Brazilian perspective, this is very bad, because let's look at my personal experience that happens with a lot of people. For example, almost every Brazilian school teach English, but it doesn't teach Spanish, which is insane, because it will be way better if Brazil have any connections with the other countries here in South America. For most of the decades, even our government didn't care about connecting with South America. And like, there is a disinterested within Brazilians with the Spanish-speaking culture. Like in my school, they actually teach Spanish, but they gave us the option to choose between English and Spanish. And even though I had extracurricular classes with English through my entire life, and when I was 13, I learned like everything that you could learn with grammar in English at that time, but I kept choosing to only study English because I had no interest to choose to learn Spanish. And all of my friends also didn't want to learn Spanish because we just didn't connect. We were very ignorant and disinterested. And I feel like this disconnect happened with both sides. Like, the Spanish speaking has no interest to learn Portuguese, and the Portuguese speaking has no interest to learn Spanish. And so xenophobia is everywhere. and talk about this prejudice with Brazil and other countries here in South America, because this xenophobia has been happening for decades. And when it comes to the thing that we connect, that is football, shit gets insane. I've been saying the word insane like a lot on this video, but it's insane. It's insane. And it gets even worse when you talk about racism, because Brazil is the blackest country in South America and the second blackest in all Latin America. And it happens an insane amount of racism from the other countries, especially slurs relating with monkey, the animal. Don't get me wrong, Brazil is also a very racist country, like... But it does happen with some Spanish-speaking country, this like superior complex comparing with Brazil because of this high black population. And of course, it also happens racism and xenophobia from Brazil with the rest of Latin America is bad from both sides, honestly. So this problem is integrated with our culture. So of course, at some point, it would happen also with the communities on the QSMP. Okay, but now talking more about the English-speaking community, because a lot of the anger that came from the Spanish community was also happening at the same time with the English-speaking community. So let's talk about it. And I think this anger all started with the nostalgia that was the beginning of the QSMP. For those who don't remember, the first month of the QSMP was only English-speaking and Spanish-speaking, and it was this happy time of starting a new SMP is very exciting, and the way that Quackity and Quackity Studios like organized the way that the Spanish community would interact with the English community was like brilliant. The egg project was brilliant because each egg had a English speaking parent and a Spanish speaking parent. So this like connection relationship was very well orchestrated. And not only that, the lore was also very heavily, obviously, in English and in Spanish, especially with Slime and Mariana. Those two were iconic. So at the moment that Brazilians joined the SMP, this balance that was happening within the Spanish and English speaking communities kind of broke. It's very funny to think about that. The beginning of the lore of like the investigation about the Federation stuff was with Cellbit, Maximus, and Beborrelo. So it was like the perfect balance with the language at the time before the French joined. But I guess the English content creators just wasn't that interested on focusing on lore. And I guess that happened because most of them were kind of tired with the insanity that was the Dream SMP that was extremely lore focused, and they had to act and like memorize lines, and it was very hard. So most of the creators just wanted to chill, and that's valid. But I feel like the English community really wanted that lore, and the Brazilians just took over. And now change a bit the topic, but racism is still a problem, so let's talk about it. I'm not saying that it's justified, but like I'm not surprised that happened. But when this anger been circling around for I guess a long time, obviously it would end up in racism at some point of time. And something that people been bringing up was the racism that Quackity been through during the Dream SMP and during like a bit after the Dream SMP. Because I remember very clearly the moment that Quackity started focusing more on his Spanish community, building his Spanish community for the first time. How the English community, the English Quackity fans felt like abandoned and sad and angry. So it happened a lot of racism from the English community on top of the Spanish community. And now is very, I guess, silly, I don't know what word to use, that the same situation be happening, but with the Brazilian community. So yeah, at this moment has been happening this shared feeling with the English and Spanish communities of like being left out and ignored, and especially compared with the Brazilian community. So this feeling turned into hate that turned into racism. So yeah, even though the Brazilian community has been the victim this week, we cannot ignore the insane toxicity that has been going on with the Brazilian fandom of the QSMP. For those who don't know, and probably most of you, I did 4 videos about the QSMP, and 2 of them were focused on the QSMP fandom, and especially criticizing the Brazilian fandom, because something that happened last year, I feel like the English-speaking community was way more prepared to be part of this huge fandom that is the QSMP, because a lot of these people were also part of the Dream SMP fandom. And like the Dream SMP fandom learned a lot with try and error and a lot of errors. So the English speaking community seen already what could go wrong, so they were way more mature about situations, toxic situations that happens on Twitter. And the Brazilian fandom were like insane, saying the most insane stuff I ever seen. So I had to make that video. But even though within the situation last week, the Brazilians has been less toxic as they usually are, but has been happening a bit of a problem. And because the Brazilians tend to be very protective about our country and our culture. So like, just because we've been the victim this time, a lot of people use this as an excuse to do the same thing to the other communities, be racist and say a lot of stuff because they were angry. So like, it's justified. But something that I always say on this channel, and right now I'm saying the first time in English, hate is unjustified. To me, even if you're hating on like the worst person ever, the person is actually like guilty of doing something horrible, I feel that hate isn't justified. If you not agree with a person, with a content creator, just stop promoting them, stop consuming their content, stop following them. That's it. I don't see a scenario that building hate is justified. I don't see where hate make it better. It only makes worse for everyone, and like is a waste of time and a waste of like brain cells, and it just sucks. It sucks. So yeah, even though the Brazilian community been suffering with xenophobia and racism, which is extremely problematic and wrong, it does not justify the hate that the Brazilians been putting on the other, sorry for my light, the Brazilians been putting on the other communities, and also putting on top of Quackity and Quackity Studios. Like, it's like the very minority that been doing this, but I've seen some people that been putting the guilt of like Brazilians being suffering this past week on top of Quackity Studios, like they did nothing to protect us or stuff like that, which I think is very unfair, because I cannot imagine what the Quackity Studios, the amount of work that they have to endure to make this project work. So hate is unjustifiable, and in this case, very unfair. So also let's talk about the French community, and the only topic that I put was that they deserve better. Because even though the French community and the French content creators are always the ones that are like forgotten about, the ones that suffers the most, because on every like events that happens on the QSMP, the time zones are always so shitty to them. The French has been being ignored by the fandom for a long time, and this is happening like with everyone, and also being ignored by Quackity Studios. They talk about this, like Quackity Studios been trying to make it like better for the French community to enjoy the QSMP, and also for the French content creators. Even though all of this happened with the French community on the QSMP, with the French content creators, they were still so mature on this chaos that was like this last week. Not only they tried to reprimand everyone that were being toxic and like making very valid points, and like they were amazing. French community, you deserve so much better, and I hope that Quackity Studios on 2024 will listen to you guys. So of course, to close this mess, Quackity Studios need to do something about it, because this cannot keep happening. If a project like the QSMP, that the idea was to unite different countries, people with different language, like break the language barrier, but problems is xenophobia and racism keeps happening, like what's the point of the QSMP even existing at all? Like, makes no sense. So I hope that the Quackity Studios finds a solution to this problem, and I hope if you watch this video this far to think about this mess. And like, following the QSMP was an insane journey, but if the QSMP just ends like with this negative image, it would be like the saddest thing ever.
And I want to give a very important reminder to everyone who consumes the QSMP and everyone who consumes my content and the content of everyone in the QSMP. I want to start off by saying that QSMP is an international global server which has the objective of uniting creators and cultures globally. We are the very first project to create a global international content creation space by breaking language barriers. That's literally why I started QSMP. That's why it exists. And I want to make one thing very clear. The negativity that has surrounded certain parts of the community since the very beginning of this project is an aspect that I completely disagree with. Constantly, time and time again, I've called it out, and I've made myself very, very clear on that. Anyone who watches and consumes my content knows that. Constantly, I've even been very, very outspoken over the difficulties I faced with racism and xenophobia in my personal life, growing up and to this day. Before starting QSMP, and even to this very single day, I get private racist and perverse messages daily where I am berated for my culture and for who I am. And for many years, I've taken the stance to give zero importance to the people who do that, because these are people that only want to do harm. Recently now, more than ever, it's clear to me why I do what I do, and it's clear to me why the QSMP exists in the first place. And even if there's one person across the world who this project is helping, then that to me is worth it enough to continue doing what I do. So I want to make it very clear. What the QSMP project does is it embraces the cultural differences in order to unite people from all across the world in a positive manner. That's its objective, and that's why I created it. So, if anyone intends to consume QSMP with any scope of negativity, whether it be towards the events, the administration team, the creators, any communities, or any of the cultures, then QSMP is simply not for you. I've met some of my best friends thanks to the server, so it's very clear to me that this concept works, and it's going to continue to work. So anyone who watches QSMP and is not ready to accept any inherent cultural differences that will arise from this project, nor is willing to consume this project in the positive way that it was created in, then this project is not meant for you. And I want to make that incredibly, incredibly clear. Lastly, I want to remind people of something very important. We are not a small community. We're a massive community. We're a huge international community. It's not small at all. So please remember and please keep in mind that there are external people outside of this project who don't even consume QSMP, whose only goal is to destabilize and divide the QSMP community. There's people who are maliciously as well and purposefully provoking others in the community with harmful remarks. Do not give these people what they want, and do not forget what the project and what the community as a whole stands for, which is respect, tolerance, community, open-mindedness, and unity. That's why I created the QSMP, and that's why it exists. And I have to make that very clear for everyone who follows the project. So yeah, I wanted to say that before we got the stream started. I wanted to clarify that and remind everyone of that fact. But yeah, that's something I wanted to talk about.
So yeah, if you managed to watch this far, even with my accent, I am really grateful. And I hope this video brings any kind of awareness to the community, because even after all this chaos, I still have hope for the QSMP. Thank you very much. Subscribe. This probably will be my only video in English, but maybe I will put subtitles on my videos. I don't know. So yeah, bye.